So I think that this should be these questions are these questions are directed to. Yeah, this is not gonna work. We're gonna have to.
Okay.
She's gonna want to.
Satya, we're gonna go upstairs, and you guys keep talking about what it's going to be, because we're already broadcasting. Can you come with me, please? I have something very special for you upstairs.
Go get Daddy's tea for it.
Okay, come.
Go with Jenny and she in her room and get Daddy's tea. All right, so we can have it.
Okay, you're gonna walk. Okay, come walk with me
careful
this
on
way.
those steps. Jen, kind of go behind her. Okay.
Awesome, you got it.
Teachers do it.
Right. Yeah, so I think she wanted to actually capture our thing too. So I think that what the audience that we're aiming at is to take people from the Stula Sharira to the Sukshma Sharira, to understand more of what the subtle body is, and really that's what yoga is about.
Because so many people these days are doing yoga as purely physical exercise. They're doing it, they're feeling an energy shift, but they don't know why.
They have no idea why it's changing and what it's about. And so I think if they could even understand, for example, what are the shariras? Like, yeah, there's the physical body, but there's the subtle body, and that's that whole matrix of energy that's the substratum to what our body and our mind is. And how that even connects back to the Karana Sharira, that causal energy or spirit that creates us to have a body.
Right.
And so I think it's very important that we keep within this area and with these practices so people can understand that.
Right.
That's your chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so I think, can we pause this?
Yeah. We'll have to start another one if we pause it.
Let's definitely do that.
Maybe.
Because until we got it quiet and that, I don't think this is,
We have someone watching though.
Are you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But this is part of what's wonderful about it, you know? Because you're real people.
Yeah, all right. It's just a bit noisy, but if somebody doesn't mind that, that's okay.
No.
Can you turn this back?
Yeah, I think you need to pull that a bit out so it sits over there too. Jenny, bring that there.
Bring this here.
Yeah. More?
More.
Whoever's watching, sorry, a few technical difficulties. We'll be with you in a second. More to Peter's side. Yeah. And you can bring it in a bit. That's good. Nice.
Yeah?
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Awesome.
Nice, Peter?
Nice.
Good. Yeah, now the angle's good.
Yeah. So you said this spirit from which everything came, and I know we both got the opportunity to see this program on Discovery recently.
Oh, yeah.
About the physics side of creation of the universe as we experience it now.
Yeah.
So this Big Bang, and I love that there's this scientific way of expressing the that notion of the intelligence, or what we end up calling the spirit because we are lacking a word, but that there goes, the scientists literally said, from nothing, everything happens in this unit of time that's so small, we had to come up with a new unit of time. And then within that unit of time, all that knowledge, or whatever you want to call it, pattern making, brilliance, mastery of the universe is everywhere.
And so there is a plan, there is a Mahatan intelligence of how we move from that formless, unbound energy which is infinite, this world which is finite is a world which is made up of time, of form, and opposites and duality. And the world of spirit and beyond these things is the world that's beyond time, beyond form. And the problem is that people don't have no clue of that, which is the avidya, the great ignorance. And the word of avidya and ignorance is such a good word because it doesn't mean ignorance that you're stupid.
Right.
It means that you're ignorant of that force.
Yeah, unaware of it.
You're unaware of it. It's so that ignorance of what you really are and what's governing us and what's moving us, that's all revealed in the Tantra. That's all revealed in the subtle body and causal body. And we need to get to people to understand that's even what asanas are for.
Yeah.
And not to get too caught up in the asana.
Right. It's a preparation to move you into an experience of these others.
It's to detangle you from being engrossed in the physical plane. And that's what asanas are for, to start loosening that where we're stuck.
Right.
And it's like it's almost like glued into this mortal fiber.
Right.
And the asanas are going to start opening us and making it looser to allow us to start to perceive what else is there.
Yeah.
So there's this whole world which the great rishis of yoga see us tuned into. But most normal people don't get it,
Right.
haven't seen it.
And as they get into asana and feel good and then think that's the end of it all, they don't have the awareness of the whole, then that becomes just another entanglement.
So our purpose here is to really show people that there is the subtle body. There are the 5 mahabhutas, the 5 elements that we're made up of. And those elements are all that really are. And how those 5 elements make up in us the different physicalities that we're made up of, but emotions, feelings, and the different levels of consciousness that make us up.
They're even happening at the levels that are more subtle. There's mahabhutas.
Exactly.
Right.
And so, but people aren't aware of that because we come out and we just, through our senses, kind of see this end package.
Right.
And we don't even look deeper into our body.
Right.
I mean, when people think of each other, or even for somebody who's looking here, well, there's the shape of Peter, and here's the shape of Al, right? And they're seeing that shape. They're not seeing, oh, there's Peter sitting with blood,
Right.
bones, organs,
Right.
senses, and made of the elements. Then it's not what you're looking at.
Right.
Whereas it would be nice if people could understand more that, yeah, there are these chakras and energetic fields making up this person, governing their behavior, governing their emotions, governing their state of consciousness. And to be able to become more familiar with those levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because when we all start to elevate ourselves to those levels of consciousness, I feel that our world we live in will be able to expand and grow so much more if all the human beings start to evolve to a different way of perceiving things.
Right. So there's the typical way that we see and we experience. And so here's the place to pitch for yoga. How is getting that awareness, how is getting some ability to work with that going to make a change, going to make us have this global evolution? What is it that yoga does that helps you accomplish something?
Yeah. So there is this, we're all born from pure intelligence, but we're born into a plane of limited intelligence. And limited intelligence is limited. And it's so hard to grasp that, and so hard for us to even understand that the limited intelligence is limited.
Yeah.
And the unlimited is the inspiration, intuition, insight, wisdom, and what the great scientists and seers in our universe, they somehow tune to that magic.
Because everyone else is walking around and they're so anxious and they feel so, like you say, limited, but they have no options, and the world is doing all this stuff to them.
Exactly.
And what can they do? And So they're all running around neurotic.
Because they've separated themselves from it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you reconnect to it, and the only way to reconnect is to get out of duality, back into, from our show, singularity,
Mm-hmm.
which is a fabulous word,
Mm-hmm.
because singularity really is the word, it's the closest word to what yoga is.
Mm-hmm.
Because yoga means to yoke, it means to pull together.
Right.
Yoke, to pull together, to stop us from being fragmented in this
Right.
world. And that's really what yoga means.
An experience of the oneness.
Exactly, and it's so yoga means moving from duality of our senses world to pulling in and being able to tune to singularity, which allows us to recontact that unbound intelligence of healing, of inspiration, of wisdom, of knowing the sciences of life.
Yeah, you used the word insight the other day.
Yeah.
I thought was so perfect because it's that ability to see into what is.
Exactly. Rather than come from this plane of just in this mortal plane of opposites.
Right. Seeing what's outside of you
Mm-hmm.
and thinking it's doing it to you.
Exactly.
Yeah. 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 So the nature of the process then is to do asana when you as you need it, but then to take on the additional pieces of yoga, which are really its core, its most powerful.
And so if you start with it and you just think Patanjali tried to put it down there, and if you can loosen again, start to loosen the fabric a little, make some space in it. Asana does that. So when we are mentally locked into a belief, we're rigid and we have a belief.
Right.
And even if it's a religious belief, this is the way, right? And it becomes this rigid thing. So asana is so fabulous because it loosens the fabric of the material body, which makes us start feeling a little bit more open, sensing, feels a bit more spirit. We feel relaxed, more spacious. But
more toward that real nature.
When we've made that space, don't stop. Now the time is to look into the space that you've made, because now you've made space for yourself to move into this other dimension of your being, to understand the electromagnetic fields, how they govern you, how the very prana, the electricity of life, animates you and makes you alive. How all of these things function together with the elements, the prana, the electricity, the elements, how they make the doshas, how the doshas, the biological mixtures of these elements have a predominance in our being, and how those dominances make us who we are. Thank you, just hit talk. And then buzz the button, come in. Thank you. So, if we can get people to that level where they start to search, and that's basically the science, first of pranayama, of mudras and bandhas, how to handle and redirect these subtle forces and start to feel them. But then comes the kriya yoga, which is to me the magical yoga, because kriya is really the science of how to handle the subtle energy of our being, that it can come back and put us in touch with that causal energy that actually creates us. That is spirit.
It's walking that line between the subtle and that original, all-pervading wisdom, of intelligence.
Exactly. It's being on that razor's edge in life, of being able to. It's being on that razor's edge of being able to touch that unbound intelligence and to put it into your living and touch it and pull it. So to be on that razor's edge, you need very much to practice regular daily. You need to sit in a state of samadhi, which is not something which is only for people in the mountains, but you need to sit in a state. Samadhi means reconnected to that source energy. Once you reconnect to it, and then come back and live in this life, then you can, but you need to do it daily because the brain patterning will pull you back out of yoga, duality, into the mind, and all that the mind and the senses world offers us.
When you're reconnected, then you're seeing things more clearly, viveka, to see things as they are and operating from that space.
Mm-hmm. And I think we spoke about last week about reaction and response. And that's such an important thing because response is where we come to life from spirit. We respond from our spirit and from how it connects to that intelligence. And reaction is when we come to things from our mind, filled with judgments, because that's all the lower mind can work on.
Yeah. Prejudging, prejudice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's all it can work on. Yeah. Can't work on anything else because it's not its nature. So the only way is through transcendence. So by getting beyond that limit of the mind, that we can actually reach this place where we can actually intuit and bring this energy into our living.
And you had said that asana helps to create a little more space in the fabric. I've always found that asana also starts to teach concentration.
Yeah. Turn a little to face you. Thank you.
So asana teaches you how to concentrate, how to begin to take your mind from its natural monkey nature, brings you to be able to focus enough that you can then start to walk across the next line of subtlety.
Exactly, and that is called tapas.
Yeah.
So the tapas, developing that ability to project beyond the senses, to have the strength to break through beyond the senses, is learned and developed in asana. And what? Because just standing and balancing on one leg, right? And doing things of this nature now is making you find another kind of energy to view inside and to feel inside. It's not just this consistent drain outwardly.
Right.
So when we develop the tapas in our being, ultimately, again, this tapas, the strong, determinate energy that we develop, is there for one thing, samprajna, to surrender.
Yeah. It's something that you have that you can draw on whenever you need it, but it's not a thing of itself that you're trying for tapas. Like some people will just do a million sun salutations because they can. Right? So that's not what we're doing. We're finding rather this mental discipline.
It's done to find that mental discipline, so that, and that's why rather than just repetitive vinyasa, balancing postures are required to develop tapas, or static poses, develop more tapas in the long run, because they bring you into stillness.
And then, so how does that then move to the next sharira? So you developed your ability to concentrate and do the tapas, and now you're going to work with pranayama.
Yeah, so now pranayama, of course, follows quite beautifully next, because through asana practice and vinyasa, like Surya Namaskar, you learn how to breathe and you stretch your breath longer. But pranayama is not learning how to do that. Pranayama is really learning how to put different ratios into the breath and using different kinds of breath and even bandhas in the breath, locks,
Holding the breath.
yeah, holding and kumbhaka, to rechannel energy in our being. So pranayama becomes the whole science of looking how prana moves through our being, how it affects our mind, what different types of pranayama do to our consciousness, and how we can utilize them to help us to get through into another level.
Because the pranayama is changing the focus of the way we're using our energy.
Ultimately, yeah. Ultimately, pranayama is to learn how to stop the breath. Not how to breathe. That's in asana. But it's learning how to use ratios and locks to actually learn how to reach into a place where you're comfortable not breathing. Sorry, my breath just stopped. And when you can get into that place of the moment between breaths, that's where we start to explore the kingdom of the subtle body and the spirit.
So you're not triggering your
Yeah.
intellect.
Because prana, when we breathe it, is used for fueling this physical vehicle and keeping the physical body going so we can work out karma. And so when we're breathing, we're actually using the prana for living. And in pranayama, we're learning how to take it and slow it down, but how to use the prana to feel it moving through the subtle body, in the nadis, in the chakras. And we can feel the prana in the subtle body. That's how the exploration of the subtle body begins. From pranayama to that karana, to learn to go into studying that subtle body.
And I think some people get discouraged because this stuff is subtle by its nature. And I hear a lot of, "Oh, I've never had that," or "Yeah, I can't do that." So it's, I think, crucial then to take the tapas that you've built before and say, you know what, I'm going to be a beginner at this for a while. I'm going to take time. It's going to take time to learn it.
Yeah. So it's very hard because you have to also have the desire to know what's beyond that. And so, yeah, you need tapas to surrender, to explore the causal and subtle body, antarkara. So when you can learn inwardly to move your prana inwardly, not that's antar. When the prana goes inwardly to explore spirit, that's kriya yoga. And so, but it really does. It takes work to reach that. And of course, for most people, it's much harder to reach that. It's not easy to reach that because they're in duality. So it definitely takes work and a lifetime of work. So in the old days, when people used to go and search for a yogi, they left life and they went to the mountains to look for these people who were doing this and studying the subtle body. But it was not something that was integrated into living, except in the times of Tantra.
Right.
Where Tantra said, use these tools of kriya Tantra so that you can tune to that intelligence and bring it into your living. But even so, it's still hard to feel, to find this knowledge in our society. So people will look, and find these, yengas and people who can do fabulous asana. And these become the renowned masters of yoga. But the true masters who know these things have to teach them very carefully. And they're subtle, and they have to be handed between teacher and taught, purely to give them the right direction, to move them into the right area. And that's where the word guru comes about from. where they can open you up to let you feel and see your subtle body and how to use these tools.
So, in order to keep people from becoming discouraged when they're trying and they have the desire for the knowledge, but they're not seeing the results, can you say anything from your own experience about how it's changing them even before they're aware of it? Like, it's hard to even notice in yourself because you're not looking so subtly at yourself. Right? It's like that sadhiyaya.
Yeah, it's very hard for the brain to recognize its own changes. So when you slowly start changing the mental the flow of energy through your brain, the neural plasticity, as you start to change the patterning, you don't really feel it until it's happened. And so what happens to one is as you do the practice, and it's a dedicated practice over time, that suddenly you start feeling stuff, it becomes alive in you. So rather than looking for something to happen to you, you should just be waiting for these nadis to open up for your experience of them to come about. They're there, but you can't sell this because it's not like an asana. You can say, well, put your toe in your ear and your foot behind your head and you've mastered this of 7 of the 3rd series, right? This is just subtly, you start to slowly feel the changes and the difference, and it's subtle, and really the place you see it is in how you then relate to life.
Relationship, right?
Yeah.
The heart chakra is the main communication between the levels.
So a tantrika, is where do we look for students, how they do it in their life, in their living. Not whether they're telling us, oh my God, I saw this amazing violet light and it took me and I went through here and I saw stars and felt this and that. Too much talk already once that's gone up because now they've brought it into this play. So it's only when they sit and do it and slowly the patterning changes and changes and changes that suddenly these fields of energy become alive. So sometimes it's the job of the teacher to be kind of like in show business, to entertain the person and keep them enthused. And keep them there long enough till they actually start feeling something. But when they feel something, then it's like, oh my God, there's something else there. And that's what we've got to get people to do. And of course, in ISHTA Tantra, we have such an incredible base of how these processes happen and the techniques of how to create them available and making it available to them.
So all they need to do is do it.
Need to do it, but they need to get the right techniques for them. That's why I added the word quickly, ISHTA Tantra. Because the ISHTA part means that which resonates with their spirit. And that's what we help people in ISHTA find. Because it's different.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you a little earlier today about like this classical notion in yoga that different people sort of approach things through a different path. Some are more devotional, and some are more intellectual, and some love work and are really good at it, etc. So that's something that the fine-tuning of the practice, it's very hard for one to do oneself. That's where a teacher comes in.
And even those, the one who's devotional usually needs to be pushed into something that is active.
Yeah.
And the one who is practicing karma yoga is usually the one who needs to be doing devotional yoga.
Right.
So,
and they're not going to naturally gravitate to
exactly, they don't naturally gravitate to it because they're gravitating to what is their way. And so most people who are choosing teachers don't know what they're even looking for to choose. Because they'll find something that they choose that suits them in their belief and in the structure of their belief pattern. And so they'll go and they'll choose that, whereas they really need to be counseled as to what's the best practice for that. And it varies, it's so subtle between the two. So those who talk a lot and want a lot of philosophy, usually don't give it to them.
Yeah. It's just a distraction.
It's a distraction. You're fulfilling what their desires are. But they need
get them into the practice itself.
Yeah. So getting people to that is very, very important. And some people love to do the bhakti because it's devotional and it helps them, but really they get stuck in the new devotional thing. And others, some people do need it, the bhakti too.
Right. They need to open.
But that's for the teacher to see those people.
And the whole notion of teachers, this kind of teacher, is even a tricky subject in our contemporary world, because you look out and you see teachers in the news or fallen off their pedestals and whatnot. It's that, talk about a fine line. What's the line between a teacher who's helping you and a teacher who needs a teacher?
So usually the teachers that fall off their pedestals are teachers that have allowed themselves to be put on a pedestal. And this is the first problem. And you see many of them. And so what we try and teach people to do is not to put anybody on a pedestal, but to look at what is their needs of their own personal growth and find the teacher that's going to be able to give them really what that is. And sometimes it's not what they like, it's what they need. So really, in the old days, people would have to go and search and find these yogis. But they're not the masses. The ones to the masses are usually swamis, religious people, religious masters, under the cloak of being a yogi. And it's not that it's bad, but it's not really teaching them the tools to access the subtle body, spirit, and our part of the universe.
Well, the beauty of the ISHTA Tantra is that it sort of strips away anything that's irrelevant to having an experience, setting up the path, the sadhana. And as you say, there are going to be people who need to develop a sense of a devotional quality. So that's not necessarily for a personality, a teacher's personality. That's just probably for themselves to become more respectful of him or herself.
Unfortunately, the opinions of people, most people have no idea of what they need. And that's why there's things like Shaktipat, where you can actually move the energy in the person by electromagnetically, by developing it in yourself, so that you can actually offer people a taste of what's there. And when they get that taste, they know.
Then it becomes real.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what is very, very important to understand. Because when you're looking for it, it's like going to buy something, shopping. And you can't shop for the guru. You can't shop for your path. You can try, but you must probably keep choosing the wrong one.
But when you have even that experience of the Shaktipat, which lets you know that it's real, there's something here, it's then not the teacher made that for me. It's the teacher, again, this avidya, made this awareness that you have this in you. So again, it's like keeps it pure, that relationship.
Completely. I mean, it's about, as I said, if the teacher's doing it to put themselves on the pedestal, they'll fall off. So it's best for the teacher. To me, a Yogiraj, a master of yoga, as I always say, is learning how to be to live with the most deepest level of humility, of humility possible. Not who can say, I am the great teacher, but the one who's just totally humble and there and a servant to be. Find this passage. But in being that servant, you actually have to sometimes be very strong and able to give the people what they need.
Be strong with them.
You need to be strong with them to give them what they need. Because people are clever and people are learned and people read today, and with the internet they can go and look everything up and have all the words, and yet the answer is usually much more subtle and insights. And so to learn what our subtle body and our causal body is about, you have to learn to become very quiet and very still. My father used to always say, if you have a glass and you want to fill it with water, and you had a glass with milk, the empty glass you just pour in the water and it's full. And it's a glass of water. Very easy. But the glass that's full or even half full with milk, then if you pour in water in and water in, and it's going to dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it. And it takes really a lot of effort and time to get that to become a pure glass of water. So usually the students who come to us who are empty are easier to fill than those who are coming with a lot of background baggage as such. So to explore the subtle world and to explore, you need the knowledge of how it all functions. But that's just like learning. The knowledge is like learning when you go on a journey. And you go and you type out directions on Google Map.
Right.
Now you've got your directions where you're going to go.
Yeah.
But you don't go anywhere until you start the journey and actually start doing it.
And that's not your experience. Your experience.
Exactly. You might say, oh, I'm going Pennsylvania, Washington, to go to Florida. But until you actually in that journey, you don't experience anything near it. So your learning is just getting the map, download. But your actual practice and the being and the flowing through it is a very important part of the journey. It's the journey itself. So even Google can't help us.
No. To recap, we have to go from the physical to the subtle.
To the causal. And from the causal to reconnect, to reintegrate with the intelligence from which we're born, which is unbound.
You said something along the way, and maybe I paraphrased it in my memory since then, but that the expression of life, the movement of Shakti, of Shiva, is in this direction into manifestation. And in yoga, we take all that force that's creating this whole universe, and we take our piece of it and turn it around, turn our consciousness around to look back at where we came from. And I've always found that such a valuable way of phrasing a meditation process, the whole yoga process.
Because it's literally doing that. It's bringing Shakti back to Shiva. It's bringing Mother Nature force, not to be going into life. We're stopping it, pulling it back in, and creating it to reunite with that intelligence.
Seeing where we came from.
Exactly.
Rather than where we're off playing.
Exactly, because it's very confusing when you're out there. Much easier to go back in and know where you're coming from.
Then you bring that back out. Yeah, you have this constant awareness that you can go back and forth because you've done it.
Exactly. Good. Any questions, Jen, from the computer?
I have questions.
Okay.
What should my practice be?
First of all, it should be daily. And for you, your daily practice should be a consistent practice. It should be the same thing that you do every day. You shouldn't fluctuate or change in your daily practice. And your daily practice should involve some asana to focus you, but because of pitta nature, you should not do too much. You shouldn't be overboard. So take postures that are challenging to you, build up to the point where you can tackle one a day and work on that one, then enough for asana. In your pranayama, it's very straightforward. Your practice should just be to work towards nadi shodhana and quieting the opposites, the pull of the opposites in your being. And that's a really important part of your being. So where normally I say to people, just do 6 breaths of that, I would recommend you to do more like 6 rounds, which is 12 breaths. So you did more of that and just let it sort of happen. Because once you get beyond the duality pulling you, the rest is easy for you. And so I would work on nadi shodhana a little bit more and do it. I don't like to put a time to it, but use it until you feel you can get beyond the senses being fueled by the duality element of prana, ida and pingala, left and right nostril. When you can actually feel, whoa, I've got that balance now. The rest will happen for you.
I have a question from Patricia.
Yes.
She sent me this one. For someone who'd like to start ISHTA meditation but never did yoga classes and have issues being seated for long because they don't practice yoga, what would be your considerations?
Even start sitting on a chair and prop yourself up in a chair. So on the chair, let the feet be firm on the floor, put it something underneath so they're not dangling, so they're solid. Prop yourself even with pillows so they're supporting you. Yeah, to keep your spine as straight as possible. And then from that posture, begin then with the practices. And again, maybe for that person who's just a beginner, the breath is usually an incredible way to start practice of meditation because it gives you something that's moving internally that you can tune to. It's very hard for the mind to tune to something that's just a concept. But if you say, look, you're breathing in and out, just to feel it. And let the hand come into the heart, and that's why Hankara Mudra is very profound, placing it in the center of the chest. And just to feel the expansion and the contraction once you propped up. And to sit as long as you can, just feeling expansion, contraction. And eventually, when you calm down and your mind is not looking for anything, you'll start coming back to a point in the center of the chest, to a point of light. The breath will pause. And you'll just feel being, loving, compassion. And you'll be able to sit in that place where there's no duality. You'll be able to sit in that place where there's the first level of samadhi. Samprajnata samadhi. You'll be able to sit where you're just totally surrendered and feel who you really are. It's your pure spirit. That's what I recommend a beginner to do. Once they taste that, then they'll want more. They can come and learn more.
Mhm.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Namaste. See you soon.